Welcome to another episode of Straight from the CPA's Mouth. We're picking up today's episode after the finale of a two-part series on taxes. If you haven't already listened to those episodes, make sure to check them out. I'm your host of today's podcast, Chris Pilger, Director of Member Communications and Recruitment at CPA Alberta, and with me today is Todd Scaletta CPA FCMA. Todd is the Senior Vice President of Research and Foresight at CPA Alberta, and today we will be discussing learning from failure, the 5 drivers of change, and the future of business.
Did you hear that head office is implementing new diversity and inclusion
less than 10% of C-suite positions at Canada's 100 companies need to be more socially responsible.
Big data represents a potential windfall of $30 billion for Canada.
Canada will do a comprehensive review of its tax system.
70% of Albertans say the economy is too dependent on oil and gas.
Filter out the noise. Hear it straight from the CPA's mouth.
Great to see you, Todd, and thanks for agreeing to be part of this podcast. I think we're going to have a really fun chat here today. When our last guest, Stephen Bergstrom, was on the podcast, he posed the question, what mistake has taught you the most? So, Todd, what would you say is the mistake that has taught you the most?
Great to be here, Chris. Actually, if it's okay, I wouldn't mind doing 2 things. One would be a bit of a reframe of the question from a mistake to really a life lesson, and how life can change and make you think about things in a different way, and what you learn from resiliency. So maybe that is a mistake, but maybe it's more along the lines of how you've been able to change and grow as a result. And if you don't mind, I've made lots of mistakes over my career, so if we can maybe even defer that question near the end of the podcast, that'll give me a bit of time to be thinking about and reflecting on some of those mistakes and what might be a good one to share with the audience.
I think we can certainly do both those things, and I think you're right that sometimes those lessons are contextual. So to get a better sense of your career and where you're at and how those things impacted you probably makes a ton of sense. So Todd, why don't you talk a little bit then about your background? You have a unique background in the profession, and talk to us a little bit about your path and how you got to where you are today.
Happy to do that, Chris, and I'll have to start off that I have been extremely fortunate and very grateful for the career that I have had. I worked in industry, so after graduating with my professional accounting designation, I did work in industry for about 10 years, various ones. I worked in construction, in real estate, in financial services, in education. And then in 1994, I actually joined and worked for the accounting profession, for the professional accounting bodies. And over my career, I have spent at provincial as well as national bodies, and it's been fantastic. So been involved in a lot of great projects. I also was involved in a lot of international travel. I served the profession on many international committees, which brought me to the U.S., to Europe, as well as Australia on occasions. I had the privilege of meeting Prince Charles in his home, which is St. James Palace in London, as well as had some meetings in Buckingham Palace. And one other project that I worked on was the Drivers of Change, and that was a national project that I worked on, really looking out towards the future. And I've had the privilege of working on many projects over my time with the profession that were all future-looking. Worked on one called World of Work 2010, another one called 2020 Vision, and the Drivers of Change, which led to the Foresight project, which is looking out to the year 2030 and beyond. So it is interesting reflecting back on some of those projects and where we got some things right and maybe where we got some things a little bit off.
So how does all of those experience tie into your current role at CPA Alberta and kind of tell us a little bit more about what you're currently doing with CPA Alberta?
Yeah. With CPA Alberta in the role of foresight and research, it's you think about organizations, and all organizations face what I'll call 2 tensions. And one of those tensions is the tension of managing for today, taking care of things that need to be done today in order to run the day-to-day operations of your organization, yet needing to still build for tomorrow and keeping an eye on the future. The second tension that organizations face is this idea of really valuing their internal resources and competencies, yet being open to exploring external. And so if I was to kind of look at my job, where my job is trying to build for tomorrow and really looking at the external market. And so it's trying to service that one quadrant of building for tomorrow and understanding what's happening in the world. And you do that through partly tying back to CPA Canada, the national office, as far as the work on Foresight goes, as well as the work that they're doing in the research areas. So I'm that linchpin between those two and helping to I guess, move away from what's sometimes called the tyranny of the inbox, like just managing for today, which can really consume you. You need to be able to step away from that. And CPA Alberta, in my role, has kind of allowed me to look out and explore the future.
So you've mentioned the CPA Canada Foresight project a few times now. Can you just tell us a little bit at a high level about Foresight and what it is and what the goals of that project are?
Sure. Foresight itself is just a technique to look out to the future, not to try to predict the future, but rather think about plausible futures. And the way you do that is you go through a process, and part of that process is to think about some of the critical certainties. And so a critical certainty would be something that you know is obviously critically important, but you have a feel that will continue on in the future. So some critical certainties that you can well imagine would be demographics and so forth, where you can see the future and you see where things are trending. But the real secret sauce with Foresight is the critical uncertainties. What do you know that's going to be really important in the future, but we don't know which way it's going to go? And when you have those, they can help shape what could be plausible futures. Again, not trying to predict the future, but trying to think about some plausible futures on where the world may evolve to. And having that information helps to shape your strategic plans. Foresight is not a strategic plan, but rather an enabler for your strategic plan to really think about, okay, if this seems to be going in this direction, what do we need to do as an organization? So trying to get ahead of the curve on that.
So you talked about plausible scenarios. Can you give a little insight as to the four? I know Foresight had four plausible scenarios. Can you talk a little bit about what those four plausible scenarios that were developed are?
Absolutely. So let's just start going back to those critical uncertainties. And so one of the critical uncertainties that we looked at was this idea of collaboration, or on one end of the spectrum would be, is the priority for the common good? And we're talking about this at a global basis, not accounting basis, but rather what's going on in the world. And so on one end of the spectrum, we would say that the high priority is common good. At the other end of the spectrum is it's more individualistic. And so where on that spectrum would we fall? The second critical uncertainty is this idea of social and technological change. Will in the future we see that to be at a high rate, or will it be more low and slow? And so having those two critical uncertainties, if you can imagine one running parallel and one running vertical, you end up with the classic 2x2 matrix. And so one of the plausible futures that we look at, and we've labeled slow and steady, is a world where we have high collaboration. So on that collaboration standpoint, common good is the top priority, but it's very slow in its adaptation and adoption of technology. And in that world, we see global leaders really coming together, working in a very collaborative manner, which is good. But with that comes this idea that it's very slow in its nature. You're trying to move as fast as the one person who's the least comfortable. So you can't really advance things as much as you'd want to. The second plausible future that we talk about is one in Phoenix Rising. And in Phoenix Rising, we have, again, high collaboration, so that's that quadrant. But in this particular case, we see technology being rapidly developed. And in Phoenix Rising, there is some type of, the difference between Phoenix Rising and Slow and Steady is really there is some catastrophe. It could be a pandemic, it could be environmental crisis, it could be financial crisis, but it is a burning platform that's driving the world leaders to force to be collaborating. And in Phoenix Rising, you have that collaborative world with technological advance, which is there to really help deal with that particular situation. As we move down below and look more individualistic, and if it's individualistic and high adoption, we have a world called Tech Titans. And in that Tech Titans world, we see large tech companies that are almost ungovernable. They have big influence on the economic and social lives of all the citizens. And no single country is able to really kind of control what they are doing. And the last world that we have is called My Way. And in My Way, it is, again, a more individualistic, but slower adoption of technology. And in My Way, I would describe that as very insular. Citizens really don't trust big government. They don't trust big organizations in My Way world. And instead, they trust people that they know. It could be their neighbors. It could be community-based. It could be people on the other side of the world, but they're like-minded. And so we see a world in My Way of more insular. And so having those plausible futures, what you want to do is develop some robust strategies that would be applicable no matter what world came out. And you also want to have some triggerable strategies. And a triggerable strategy is, boy, if we see things moving towards tech titans, we would take off this particular strategy off the bookshelf that we developed and implement that. So that foresight and having that ability is more, again, thinking about possible futures, plausible futures, with the idea of preparing the mind of the organization and the mind of the employees for what might be.
Yeah, and that was going to be my question is, as an organization, if you're looking at a planning exercise, do you pick one of those and kind of put your eggs in the basket, we think we're going this way, or do you kind of, these are quite disparate, but let's try and come up with something that could apply regardless of those four?
Yeah, great question, Chris. And so ideally, with Foresight, you're looking out 10, 20, in some cases, organizations are looking out 50 years. There is a Japanese company, and I might have the numbers a little bit wrong, but they had like a 300-year plan. So they're trying to think that if we're going to be around for 300 years, what does that mean today? And so when you go out 10, 20, 50 years on typical Foresight projects, it's that combination of what are some strategies that no matter what world evolves will work for us, but also be prepared as we're trending. And so what you want to do is not only put those plausible futures out there, but then continue to monitor to see what events, what trends are taking place that might have us believe that we're moving towards one of these. It's never going to be perfect. It's not perfect science by any means, but it's there to give some directional guidance. So a combination of a strategy that works for all worlds, as well as having some other strategies that would be more applicable for one of those 4, 5, or 3 worlds, whatever Foresight format you use.
So it may be self-evident, but from your perspective, why is it important for an organization to engage in this type of thinking and this type of planning? What's the benefit if I'm a small business and I'm kind of right now stuck on those inbox tasks, as you said?
Yeah.
Where's the benefit to me and to my organization for doing this kind of planning exercise, which, it takes some time and some thinking and doesn't maybe necessarily have an immediate payoff. So what is the payoff?
The payoff becomes you're thinking about possibilities. So it's opening your mind to other aspects. And again, it's very easy to have your head down and be working and trying to get through your day. But all of those days, if you're only your head down managing for today, you can get blindsided by tomorrow. And events, competition, technology, some types of disruption could cause your business model to go away while you're just managing for today and everything was fine. So it's more just, it's a good preparedness exercise for any organization.
And do you have any tips for someone who may be listening on how to make sure they do it, how to make sure they take the time necessary to do this sort of planning?
Yeah, so organizations that I've been involved with that have done Foresight, some do it as part of their annual strategic planning process. So again, Foresight is not your strategy, but it's there to inform your strategy. So I know of a few organizations that just have actually included it every year as part of their strategic planning process. I tend to think if you do Foresight every few years, I think that's a good exercise to think about the plausible. But it doesn't end there. What you want to continue to do is think about and read and look at trends that are taking place in the world to help you get better understanding of opportunities as well as some potential threats that could be coming your way.
Yeah, and just based on my own experience, and I've been with CPA Alberta and predecessors for almost 20 years, and on one hand, things haven't changed in those 20 years in some ways, but in other ways, it's changed immensely in ways that you couldn't have predicted. I'm not sure 20 years ago I would have predicted unification as an example, right? Which was a huge change. And yet there are some aspects of what the organization does that are the same. So, over that lens of times, I think you really can see the value of this type of activity when you take that kind of perspective. You previously mentioned the 5 drivers of change. So can you talk a little bit about those and how they play into foresight and planning?
The 5 drivers of change, it's your classic drivers of change. It's geopolitical, economic, environmental, technological, and societal. And those 5 drivers really help from the standpoint of thinking about just how to categorize some trends that are taking place in the environment that could be going out. And so when you're looking at those drivers of change, what they are helpful for is really to help shape and feed in to your foresight work. So the Drivers of Change project that I worked on a national basis, again, led into the foresight project that we're currently working on.
And so how do those drivers of change, how can you incorporate them into planning, and what value do they bring to an organization if you think through those lenses?
It's your straight situational analysis. So anytime you're doing an environmental scan of the operating environment that you're working in, the drivers of change is one of many frameworks, but certainly a very good framework. And so if you think about what's happening geopolitically, how is that going to be impacting my organization? What's happening economically that could have an impact on my organization? What's happening from an environmental standpoint that could impact my organization? Technology, as well as what's happening in society, are all really good ways of just having a wide, broad view of what's taking place in the external environment, which I may either need to be able to take advantage of through opportunities or be able to prepare for those threats.
Okay. So I think we've got a really solid kind of understanding of your background and your current role. And right. I'm wondering if it's time to circle back to our original question, which
Sure.
is, what have you learned? What's a mistake that you've made? What have you learned from it? Or what life lessons can you take from mistakes?
Absolutely. So I think actually I'm going to reflect a bit on my career again. And one thing I didn't mention, I did mention that, in 1994, I started working for the profession itself. And there was a brief period, about a 5-year period, where I actually went out on my own. And that was a fantastic time of my life. My kids were all at very young, school age. I went out and I did what I just referred to as a portfolio career. I had many small different jobs. So I would be teaching. I was teaching at MacEwan University. I was teaching in some at other schools and MBA programs. I was doing consulting work. I was doing work for contract work for one of the accounting bodies. And I had really good life work integration. So it was a great time. Then I got a job offer. And it was really weird to kind of take a job and have to book vacation after a 5-year period of kind of running your day as you saw fit. But I did take that job, and it was with the national office, and it was fantastic. And I really was blessed. I just felt that I was paid to learn every day. And then eventually I took on a new job, another job. And I would say mistake is probably too harsh a word to describe, but what I would indicate is that particular job that I ended up taking on after my national role didn't play to my strengths. And back in about 2005, I went through an exercise. It was based on a Harvard Business Review article called Play to Your Strengths. And what it did was a very simple exercise of just going out to colleagues, work colleagues, friends, associates, people who work for you, people you work for, and asking them one question. The question was, tell me one of my strengths. And when you got that feedback, it was obviously very positive, but you're also then synthesizing and looking and going, here's some commonalities that I'm seeing across this wide spectrum of things that I'm good at. And then what you want to do is kind of shape your job around those strengths. The analogy that they gave in the article is it'd be like taking a third baseman and saying, okay, well, you're really good at knocking down hardline drives and picking them up and making a long throw to first base. But you're not really fast. So what we're going to do is we're going to make you a center fielder, and we want you to work on your speed. That person's natural skills weren't best suited in center field. They're best suited at third base. And so it's a long story, but basically when I moved into this other job, it was a lot more administration. It wasn't playing to the strengths that I had personally identified. And, you know, I was having, there's a lot of personal aspects going on in my life, including my mom's deteriorating health. My wife had a cancer scare. I had one of my children was having some mental well-being issues. So there was a lot going on in the personal life, and the work was not fit to play to my strengths. And that was a very challenging part of my life. But I guess what I got out of that was resiliency and some really good lessons. And so I would say lesson one is play to your strengths. Look for things that you're good at and try to leverage that. The other thing is talk to friends and colleagues. A few friends that had known me for quite some time, just as soon as we'd go for coffee, they go, boy, you're not the same, Todd. I had one friend who said on a happiness scale of 1 to 10, you know, you're around a 3 or a 4. Wow. And he said, in your job, I think the highest you can get is a 6. And so that really caused me to reflect. And you got this challenge, right? You're trying to provide for your family. So you're feeling kind of locked in with all these pressures. Yet my blood pressure was skyrocketing. I had weight gain. And so my health was being definitely impacted by the mental strain from all that. And so what I managed to do was really reflect and go back to play to my strengths. I also had the benefit of an executive coach. We went through a battery of different assessments: leadership style assessment, emotional intelligence assessment, strong inventory. What are strong inventory interests? So what are the key interests that I'm interested in? And I helped find another job. And it's been fantastic. And so that job was really shaped around my strengths. So I was fortunate enough to be able to really reflect, use some resources, use some friends to think about what the future holds for me and how to shape that job. So I think, again, I know I'm not the only one out there that's, because I've talked to a lot of colleagues that are going through, a bit of a sandwich generation where you got parents you're dealing with, you've got kids you're dealing with, there's extenuating pressures at work and family.
Todd, thanks for sharing that, first of all. Do you think you would have ended up in the same place without that lesson? Do you think there would have been, you mentioned there were some factors in your personal life that led to it. Do you think you would have got to where you are now without that having happened in a different way? Or do you think that was an impetus for kind of what has come since?
There's definitely an impetus for what has come. And I would say is that I don't look at it with any regrets at all. It has helped shape me. It has given me a reservoir of understanding that I have resilience if I can make it through such aspects and come out on the other side. I'm fortunate to have a fantastic family, a wonderful wife to help. And so, since then, I've really taken up meditation. I exercise regularly. I have gratitude. And I think all those things were a direct result of having gone through that experience, that you really start to appreciate your days and your lives when you've made it through that. So, I don't think I'd be the person today that I am without having gone through that experience. But I have to say, there's a lot of dark days during that time, and you're going through and you're waking up, and there's this overarching kind of black cloud where you don't feel you can be happy, because if you're going to be happy, another shoe's going to be dropping, something's going to be coming at you. And so you even on good days weren't good days. And again, my friend pointed that out. He said, boy, you're like a 3 and 4 at a happiness scale. And part of that was self-defense, that I didn't want to put myself out to figure I was going to be happy because I knew something else was coming down the pipeline. So I think at the end of the day, there's resources out there for people. This is important. It is a growing phenomenon. People dealing with depression and burnout and so forth. And it's good to talk about it and good to get through it. Like I say, I have a great appreciation for life, what I have, and certainly very much enjoying my role with CPA Alberta, really playing to my strengths in the job that I have now.
I think that you've kind of got onto something which is really important and part of the mental health aspect, which is not having regrets. And so in a sense, giving yourself permission to make mistakes, because I think that is a really key component. If you're kind of always thinking back to it and kind of regretting it, you probably won't be able to take a lesson and grow from it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. A lot of this is people can live in a world of yesterday and regrets, and live in a world of fear about tomorrow. And when they do that, they're never in the present. They're never dealing with today. And it's very easy to live in those two worlds of regretting past mistakes and being anxious about what the future holds, because we don't know what that future holds. But if we do continue to live our lives that way, we're missing out on all the fantastic things that could happen today.
Absolutely. Well, Todd, thanks for your time today. I think this has been a fascinating conversation and a lot of good lessons here. So I thank you very much for joining us. Are there any other final thoughts that you'd like to share with?
You know what? I do appreciate the opportunity, Chris. I think this is important. I am, again, very thankful for the career that I've had to date. It's been an awesome journey, and all the people that I've met along the way. So it has been great, and I think that's about it. And again, if people are having some struggles, reach out. There's people to help.
That's right. Thank you for that, Todd. Straight from the CPA's mouth. Here on Straight from the CPA's Mouth, we give Alberta CPAs the opportunity to share their knowledge and experience with the world. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we appreciate all of you for listening in. This episode marks the closing of the first season of Straight from the CPA's Mouth. Since its launch in May of last year, the podcast has had the opportunity to showcase the experiences and stories of over 25 established CPAs and has also been able to share their insights in multiple mini-series. This is not the end, though. Straight from the CPA's Mouth will be back in May with more CPAs, stories, and interesting information. Keep an ear out on May 4th for the launch of Season 2. Make sure you subscribe. You can do so and find more information by visiting cpaalberta.ca/podcasts.
Straight from the CPA's Mouth is brought to you by the CPA Education Foundation. The CPA Education Foundation is the charitable arm of the Alberta CPA profession, providing up to $1.2 million each year in support of business and accounting education in the province. This podcast is just one of many resource materials available through the HESI CPA Knowledge Centre. This virtual hub features Alberta CPAs sharing their unique perspective and vast expertise on topics and issues such as leadership, finance, entrepreneurship, and more. Visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation for more information on the HESI CPA Knowledge Centre and to learn how Alberta CPAs inspire success.